Anyway, I'd like to, first of all, I would like to thank Mary Mason and Rhoda Unger for helping us to get Margret here. They are all scholars at the Women's Studies Research Center at Brandeis. And Mary and Rhoda have gotten many speakers for us here. As you know, we have a women's history group that they participate in, and we've been meeting every single Friday for 8 years.
Wow.
Yes, impressive. So our speaker today, Margret Morganroth Gullette, is an internationally known age critic and cultural critic, and she's a prize-winning writer of nonfiction. Her essays are frequently cited as notable in Best American Essays. She has published in the New York Times, Ms. Magazine, Al Jazeera, Guardian, The Nation, Boston Globe, American Scholar, American Prospects, and on and on and on. She's a recipient of NEH grants, Bunting Fellowships, and she's a member of PEN America. She's also an activist in Nicaragua. Her work has helped hundreds of adults to become literate and graduate from high school. Her books include Age-Wise, Fighting the New Ageism in America, which won an Eric Hoffer Book Award, Aged by Culture, selected as a notable book of the year by the Christian Science Monitor, and she also wrote Declining to Decline, which won an Emily Toth Award and was chosen as Best Feminist Book on American Popular Culture. She is here today to talk about her latest book, Ending Ageism, or How Not to Shoot Old People. And this book is also for sale afterwards, which she will sign. It's over there in the alcove, and it's $15. But let me introduce to you Margret Morganroth Gullette. We're very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
So I'm delighted to be here. I had heard something about Newbury Court. I Googled it. I think it's a beautiful place. And I was talking to my aunt this week about it. My aunt just celebrated her 97th birthday, and she was a librarian and she reads all the time. And I like to use her as a sounding board for, well, she tells me what I should be reading these days. But also, I told her I'm going to talk about my book, which she is nearly blind, so she can't read it. But she has heard me on the radio a number of times talking about it. And then, of course, we've talked about it over the years. And I said, so I'm talking to these people about ageism. And my aunt said two things. She said, well, it's rather an expensive place, isn't it? Yes, I guess so, I said. She said, I don't think they'll know a lot about ageism. So, I'm going to hold that thought. I'm going to ask you to do something before I begin, and that is turn to the person next to you and tell them briefly what the worst example of ageism you know is. Ageism. Yeah. Just tell the person next to you the worst example of ageism. Well, good. Thank you. And then I'm hoping that we can come back at the very end and that you'll tell me some of the stories that you have just told. You may also have said to your companion, what? What is ageism? Okay. Ageism is a grave global issue of social justice and rights. Now, I could talk for a whole hour about this, but I'm not going to talk about it as a global issue. I'm going to stick mostly with the United States today. But if you think that it's done so much better elsewhere, probably not. One of the things that has been happening is that our own ageism in the United States has been getting worse for about 30 or 40 years. And our media disseminate our kind of ageism all over the world. Not in China so much, but China has its own problems. And what we are hearing in the press and from the pundits and from our own government and from many governments is that there are too many old people and something ought to be done about it. Now, that is not me speaking. That is the director of the International Monetary Fund. Her name is Christine Lagarde, and she has been saying this in so many words since 2012. So I'm going to move along, but never forget that global ageism is a worldwide phenomenon, and it is leaching into governments at the topmost level because they are becoming more and more conservative, as in fact our own government is. So let me see if I can do this. Okay, so because ageism is so bad, I invented a goddess who will be the goddess of age. And a goddess, she is the Crone Goddess. She is our tutelary deity. She is the person that we can turn to and say, okay, we have this power on our side. What kind of power remains to be seen? Does anybody recognize her? No hands. Wait. Do you recognize the artist? It's Michelangelo. It's from the Sistine Chapel. She is one of the four Sibyls, and she's the Libyan Sibyl. Okay, so I got two friends at the Women's Studies Research Center to change her look. And they did two things to her. First of all, they gave her gray hair. Michelangelo's does not have gray hair. And then, because she's Libyan, they gave her a nice North African warm color. She's all white in the Sistine Chapel. Okay, let's just remember, for every horrifying thing I say to you today, we have to think, we could have a goddess who will protect us. And she is writing the book of age. And we're going to help her write a better book. And my book is intended to be one of the books. It's in her bibliography already. You know, just needs to be in big print. I've already been told that here. Okay. Ageism is the trigger. Aging is. Okay. Now there's a lot of discussion about what aging is. And if you just read the scientists and the doctors, they say aging is the decline unto death. Aging is a collection of diseases. Aging is, and they just have a total decline story. And I say, from the point of view of ageism, aging is just the trigger for ageism. It's the way we look. It may be, yeah, it's the way we look. Or the way we are thought to look. Or the way we are thought to be. And this trigger is not our fault, right? It's whoever thinks it is. So, elders are always a minority. Now this is another thing that you'll never hear if you read the press. You hear we are a tsunami. You'd think we were the majority of Americans or Brits or whatever country is being talked about. In fact, we are 22%, something like that. We will always, I'm sorry, some people can't even see me. Some people are, and do move if I'm just invisible, no matter what I do. We are a minority, and we always will be a minority. If you read the papers and it says in 2038, you know, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, well, that's what I'm saying. But the minority status is true internationally, in every country, even in Japan. The fact, as I see it, is that heterogeneous as old people are, privileged as some may be, we endure many attributes of other numerical minorities, like people of color. Invisibility, on the one hand, and hypervisibility on the other. Intolerance of our appearance, lack of audience for our subjectivities and our grievances. And this is true for women too, although we have not been a minority for a long time. Everything I say is true of women and people of color, and now it's true of being old. Underestimation of our trials, dislike of our alleged characteristics, or disgust at our apparent weaknesses, unwillingness to look us in the eye or be in our company. And sometimes these are called, mixed with the chilling sentimental look that Jean-Paul Sartre, referring to anti-Semites, called brotherly love. And that's the how cute they are trope, which it disgusts me. Okay. If this gets too grim, just remember, the goddess, I named her too. Her name is Senexa. Anybody who knows Roman theater knows that there is a figure called the Senex. Well, she is Senexa. Okay, next slide. So I have a new motto for everybody, and that is fight ageism, not aging. Or defy ageism, not aging. And my book, I think, discovers traumatic ageism. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the suffering and traumas of ageism. I hope I'm not describing experiences that you have had, but if it's true, then I hope we'll be able to talk about it a little bit. Now, this is the opening of the book. The history of liberation movements reserves a special place of honor for the documents that reveal inflicted suffering. Enlightenment struggles for American independence from Great Britain, the abolition of slavery in Britain and the United States, and women's rights everywhere needed such evidence to reframe public opinion. If you can't say how you suffer, then nobody cares to change. Reform depends on having the wrongs described feelingly. Who will dare describe them? So I hope you started talking to one another about this, and I hope we're going to see some of it. The next slide it's a nice little machine. Okay, talking while old. You say, what? What could this possibly mean? Okay, I have a friend who told me this story. She's in the supermarket, and she's trying to pay, and she's wondering if she should get extra cash. And as she's pausing momentarily over the button, a big male arm comes right by her, almost pushes the button that says no, and says to her, "Say no." And she went, and he said, "That's what I always say to my grandmother." Now, let me ask you, I turn this to you. What would you have done in that circumstance?
Waited. Waited for her to collect herself.
No, if you're her, you are her. You are my friend. This has just happened to you. This big, hairy male arm has just crossed in front of you and tried to tell you what to do.
Tell him to get the hell out of there.
In so many words, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Get the hell out of my way. Right. Anybody else? Oh, lots of... How about you and then the...
I would ask the clerk to redo the system so I could push yes.
Yeah, he hadn't quite, he hadn't quite pushed it. He had just put his finger over it. But yes, there are a couple more. Yeah.
I just had a question because I was trying to understand what you were saying. I thought he was thinking she didn't know what she wanted to do. Not that he was impatient particularly, but he was making up her mind for her.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that-
Yes.
Yeah.
Robert's already responded to that to that interpretation of his behavior. Yes. And somebody else here had.
Especially when he said, "That's what I do with my grandmother."
Yes. Right. You got it.
I said yes. Yes.
That you'd say.
Just contradicted him.
Oh. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, this is the sort of thing. I have a friend who has She has a website. It's called Yo, Is This Ageist? And you can write to her and tell her what your own experiences are. And she'll write back, and she'll give you mostly snarky answers. She won't give you a polite answer. Well, I mean, it's a plausible answer. It's just not always polite. Okay, that's in the supermarket. Then I'm going to go to Violet's paralysis, because this is another case where, what would you have done? I was at a conference, and Violet was there. And she was a strikingly beautiful actress, my age, with springy white hair. And she told a story about a rehearsal process for King Lear that she was in. Violet had been the only older person present one day, and no one had picked up on any of the ideas that she offered about the parts or how to play the play. Although she herself, an admired character actor, was going to play Lear. They were going to do a female Lear, and she was going to be Lear. Right. So, and they had chosen her for the quality of her acting. So Violet then kindly decided that she would have to go silent the next day to let the young actors speak. And they did speak. To borrow a street term used also in psychoanalysis, they dumped on her ideas. They said they were bored. I felt destroyed, she told the conference. They had publicly stripped her of a major identity as an experienced theater professional. After that, she had barely been able to get through another speech, and this time it was one spoken by the Duke of Gloucester, who stands as he thinks above the cliffs at Dover. And if you may remember, the Duke of Gloucester has been blinded at this point. He feels he's been abandoned, and he's looking for a place to die. So his son, who's pretending not to be his son, has led him to the cliffs of Dover. At that point, she said, when she was supposed to read these lines, paralysis overtook her. So this is one of the forms of traumatic ageism. She labored through Gloucester's little two-line speech. And these are the words that he had to say. "This world I do renounce, and in your sights shake patiently my great affliction off." It took her forever to get through it. Shaming, and this is what had happened to her. She had been shamed. Shaming typically undoes some vital parts of us. If we stay wordless, it may cause somatic symptoms. Somatic symptoms are bodily symptoms. Somatizing is when, instead of speaking or doing, we just internalize something and it turns out to be a symptom, a sickness. And it could be nausea, or it could be acid reflux, or it could be vomiting, or it could even be what happened to her, near paralysis. Violet didn't mind this, no. We didn't see a submissive, downcast gaze, or broken speech, or sobs, or shaking. Firmly, she recounted how she forced her way through this task after the crushing demotion. But then she said that the cast's meanness was her fault. Yes, oh dear. For being old. I mean, she's not that old, right? I said she was my age, and this was a couple of years ago. Violet felt she was wrong rather than that she had been wronged. For some people, the shaming that comes with aging is an expectation, but in Violet, it flared up from what I call external violence. I say that what happened in the rehearsal room was violence. They didn't attack her except in words. Only words. Only words. Right? But we know how painful words can be. She was thrown by the coldness of the affect in the rehearsal air. And I get these terms from a philosopher friend of mine who died named Teresa Brennan. That affect had to have been the younger people's irritation at her female authority, at her grand voice from under her spray of white hair, and their giddy pile-on as what I call young judges. Young judges think they have the right to judge, and they know what your problem is. And that boy in the supermarket was one of those young judges, right? As that lady said, he knew what she should be doing. So, it took bravery to tell us. Violet had forged a public space at the conference for reporting the violence, but by making the mistake of blaming herself, she gave everyone present her impression, which she conveyed in her actor's passionate, performative way, that age was a crime that deserved punishment. I had felt intense sympathy for her paralysis. Now, although I kept silent, I was not going to correct her in a big conference in front of everybody else. I became agitated. Violet didn't undermine only herself. She was teaching what I call age shame. People are no longer told to be ashamed of cancer. You probably remember that they used to be. They know now that cancer is not their fault. Well, ageism, when misconstrued by its victim, is shamogenic. And shamogenic means it causes shame. And shame is a kind of violence. There'll be plenty of time to disagree. Walking while old. Now, has anybody heard the expression walking while black? Could you say what it is? What it means?
What is the question?
Walking while black. Anybody know what walking while black means? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that's a black person just walks down the street. They're more likely to be accosted by a policeman or somebody else than a white person.
Yeah, I think that's true. But there's another thing that goes back to an older period, and that is that they had to get out of the way for a white person.
Oh, yes, yes.
Right. And that's what I'm calling walking while black. You shouldn't be, if somebody else wants the space, you shouldn't be there. Okay. A brand new form of ageism is where you have to step out of the way when a younger person is about to walk through you. One tall woman friend of mine, only 73, but slender enough to appear weak, says, "They are playing chicken with you. They want the sidewalk. Make that old lady move out of the way." Conscious that this is a chronic urban danger, she avoids main streets. Female professors as young as 50 and mostly males find that mostly male students are bumping into them on campus sidewalks or in hallways. And this is true. A friend from Wisconsin who teaches at Wisconsin told me this story, and she put it into an essay, and she found other women faculty who were 50 and over, and people were walking into them. Now, if you remember your college days, I mean, you would have died before you walked into a professor, right? Is this not just a huge change? Now, I've had people say to me, but look, I mean, they're so busy, they're so distracted, they're on their phones. Believe me, they are not walking into the captain of the football team. Can I offer you a little water, ma'am?
Yes.
Try that.
Thank you
Now I'm going to go on to the next one. Next slide is going to a doctor while old. And I think probably every one of you has a story to tell about that. So do start telling them to one another. You probably all know the story about the woman who goes to the doctor with a bad knee. I'm not going to finish it. If you don't know it, I'll tell you afterwards. But I'm going to tell you about other kinds of medical ageism because I decided they were serious enough, not joking. There's a professor named J.O. Allen. Although Allen recognizes that ageism is not experienced over the entire life course as racism typically is, she nevertheless finds that the mechanisms of body-mind distress work similarly. Excuse me, could I have water back when you come back? Can I have my cup of water back when you come back? Thank you. Now, studying this kind of ageism is in its infancy, but she sees evidence that, quote, repeated exposure to chronic stressors associated with age stereotypes and discrimination may increase the risk of chronic disease, mortality, and other adverse health outcomes. I don't know, mortality is about the most adverse health outcome you could have, right? And once you are ill, many specialists treat you differentially, denying not so very old people, this is based on data, not so very old people with lung, colorectal, and breast carcinomas and lymphoma the life-saving treatments they would offer younger people, though the former could benefit as much. The odds of not receiving chemo, if you were a woman over 65 with breast cancer, are 7 times greater than for a woman under 50. Yes. For heaven's sakes, I read these studies and I know that people do not know these facts. And they think that medical ageism is just something that a doctor says to you. No, it's something that surgeons may do to you or not do for you because you're old. Now, I feel, going back to Senexa again, think of the goddess, right? There are always good doctors in the world. And one of them, I quote, is, he said, if I have a 90-year-old person, man or woman, and their health is otherwise good, and they have cancer or heart disease, and I think I can help them, I will help them. Age should not be the only criterion for medical care. So, I'm going to talk a little bit more. How am I doing on time? Thank you. I'm going to talk about family, because one of the things I think that saves us, or may save us, is family love. And I have a lot about my own family in this book, and I think maybe I'll just read a little bit about this. So, I have a multi-generational family. The oldest is my Aunt Florrie, 97, whom I've already introduced you to, and the youngest is 14 months old. And so for us, our history is intimate, and it's anecdotal, and it's fabulous. It's in our genealogy, and it's more powerful than our genes. We don't care to be addressed as if each age cohort shared values primarily with those who chance to be the same age. So, I'm going to read from Marilyn Robinson right now. This is Marilyn Robinson from an essay. If you don't know Marilyn Robinson, she is one of the great American novelists. She's still alive, she's still working, and Gullette is her most extraordinary novel. I see Mary nodding. So, anybody else read Gullette? Oh, marvelous. Okay, talk it up. It's by a man who has a heart disease that is going to kill him, and it's just a wonderful first-person narrative about his life and his history. And Marilyn Robinson says, love is loyalty. The real issue is, will family members shelter and nourish and humanize one another? This is creative work, requiring discipline and imagination. The antidote to fear, distrust, and self-interest is always loyalty. So, because I feel this is true in my family, this creative kinship matters so much. And in my family, we worry about whether all of us, from the youngest to the oldest, are going to be able to move successfully through every phase of the life course. Our younger relatives, brought up with our traditions, our tragedies, and our peculiarities, are able to live inside our skins, even now when some of these show wrinkles. And people operating as members of families, like Jessie, the student we will meet in Chapter 3, who describes her unemployed uncle, are the likeliest to be aghast at discovering contemporary forms of ageism and to reject them indignantly. And because I count on young people so much to be anti-ageist, I want to say to you now, if you are thinking of buying my book, don't just read it yourself. Give it to your grandchildren. Particularly if you have a grandchild who is in high school or college, those are the people who need these books. Mine is not the only one. So do a little proselytizing to your grandchildren about anti-ageism and make them aware of it. Now, I'm going to go to another novel. This is by Tove Jansson, and it's called The Summer Book. Okay. It's just, I don't really need this slide. Oops. No. The characters are the grandmother, who isn't named, and her granddaughter, Sophia, and her son. And she has a friend named Werner. Actually, it's spelled with a V. And what happens is the grandmother is just a marvelous mothering figure to Sophia. Sophia has just lost her own mother, so she is grieving. And the grandmother helps Sophia go where she needs to go emotionally. Her ways, the ways she treats Sophia, are lessons in parenting. Sophia, who indeterminate age, but I would guess she's 10 or 11. Sophia claims there is a hell. Well, you can imagine why. No, says the grandmother. We get comfort when we die. That's the whole idea, the grandmother says, knowing she must rebut this strongly. Is Sophia thinking that that's where her mother is? Though handicapped by dizziness, the grandmother crawls under a thicket to carve outlandish, entertaining animals that Sophia can find when she is crawling around on their island. And when another child comes to visit and turns out not to be a really interesting person, Sophia runs for advice to her finer companion, her grandmother. Towards the end of the novel, however, this woman, whom we find admirable, is odiously ignored by her own son. Going off island to visit friends, he leaves her behind with a note. Love and kisses to those too old and too young to come to the party. Obtusely revealing that excluding her was deliberate. It wasn't just forgetfulness. Tactless, she mutters. Worse, he fails to tell his mother that she and Sophia will be moved to another island when he departs for a week. It's her granddaughter who tells her this news. To her son, she's become a mere dumb object, she thinks. Quote, it was a nuisance. Even potted plants needed to be cared for, like everything else you took care of that couldn't make decisions for itself. So she thinks he's treating her like a potted plant. The son's treatment calls her into being as an old person in a way that her cane, her false teeth, and chronology, she's 80-ish, I think, had not turned her into an old person. It shows readers that old, whatever that means negligible. And the novel's evidence of her violated personhood is doubled by the wound her only friend receives from his family. They mean well. They mean well. But you're only 75, the grandmother said in astonishment. Surely you can do what you like. Werner says they don't let him. Quote, he says, and when you get right down to it, you are mostly just in the way. Ill-judged interference and cold-heartedness are not the worst intimate abuses. Worse is recounted in later chapters. But without fulfillable desires, without autonomy, life turns insipid. Some victims of ageism struggle. Their life force and their allies stiffen their resolve. But the end of being recognized as an equal is for this woman a starved state. And I read the end of this novel as meaning that she is sort of going to let herself die. But I'm going to turn this back to you again. The son leaves the note that he goes off island. He says she's too old to come to the party. And he's treating her like a potted plant. So, how would you deal with him?
Have your own party.
Okay, that's what you would do? Anybody else? Have your own party is the first.
I cut him out of the will.
Oh, well now you are quoting from the end of my book. Because one of the options is, it's an emotional option more than anything else. It's a fantasy of revenge, right? It doesn't have to be an act of revenge, but I think it's very helpful sometimes to have a fantasy of revenge. And I have a whole page that is sort of about what a revenge fantasy might be like. Okay, so we have get a party, have your own party, and cut him out of the will. Yes?
I wouldn't cut him out of the will. I would correct my thinking about revenge, correct my thinking about myself, let him get on with his life, and get on with mine. We don't have to be victims of other people's thinking.
Uh-huh. So basically, let him go emotionally.
Yes, he will find his own way. His own life will bring him up short when it needs to be. But get on with your own life.
I'd like to hear from other people now. I think any other. Oh yes, ma'am.
I would go to the party. I mean, if he was going to a party and she wanted to go to it, just get a boat.
Okay, get a boat and get to the party. Well, I actually don't think that's such a bad idea. If she had access to a boat, yeah, just turn up. And would you say anything when you got to the party?
No, just enjoy yourself. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? I want to hear from Rhoda. Yes, Rhoda.
I don't understand why he shouldn't be cut out of the will.
Oh, okay. I see that the revenge. Read the page about the revenge fantasies. It's very good. It will strengthen you. Anybody? Yes. Okay.
Someone asked, why should he be cut out of the will? He's autistic. The trouble is we don't have enough information about the son and what their relationship was like to make any intelligent questions about what we would or wouldn't do. But the reality is that for some reason, he doesn't care about his mother, and I don't know why.
Uh-huh. Could he be made to care? Let's go down this alley. I'm sure many of you have adult children, and they must have hurt your feelings at one time or another, and you did not cut them out of your will. So what would you do? What would you say, ma'am?
Well, just try to get the conversation going by saying, well, why didn't you think that I might like to go?
Yes, okay. Let's work this line again. She said, you could have a conversation with him and say, why would you think I wouldn't want to go to the party? Okay, any other sentences? Because one of the problems with dealing with human beings is that you have to find the right sentence to say, right? Yeah. So are there any other sentences that you could say? Would you do it right after he came back from the party? When would you do it?
I don't know.
Anybody else who would talk to him?
Wouldn't do you any good to talk to him after. If you're going to get any real resolution, it would have to be before.
Life goes on, and you have a granddaughter, right? You have a granddaughter. You want to go on seeing? Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to use that microphone.
Okay.
Bibi Schnitzer, I'd like to go back to this revenge.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I want you to use
Oh, thank you. Bibi Schnitzer from Rivercrest. I'd like to go back to this revenge. I would in my fantasy, invite everybody at the party that he had invited, and they would all come. And he would not know, would go and not find anybody.
I don't know. This group seems really to be very heavily weighted towards various revenge fantasies. I want to stay a little bit longer on getting a better relationship with the son. He's also lost a wife. I don't know why he doesn't want to. We'll never know. We only know what we know. But what would you say, and when would you say it? Yeah.
I think I would say
I'll repeat it, actually.
I think I would say I would have a discussion with him, and I would say, I want you to know you've really hurt my feelings. I have certainly said that to my adult child before, and it really works.
Does it?
Because you get their attention.
Uh-huh.
Because they can't imagine that they hurt your feelings. Because,
they can't. They can't imagine that they've hurt your feelings. But would he be so devastated that he would lash back?
Well, you have to do it for yourself.
Uh-huh.
Make yourself feel better because you're expressing how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it'll take a while for him to digest it. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. That hurt my feelings. I think that's, there's a lot of counseling that says you have to express your feelings. When you say that it makes me feel like a potted plant, that was another, I've had this discussion in other groups, and I had it with a group in Wellesley, and their answers turn up on page 187, I think, in the book. So if you want to read some more answers, it's there. It's there. Okay. I mean, one could go on. If this were a smaller discussion group, we could definitely go on, and I would love it.
I think there are those husbands who wouldn't be terribly affected by somebody saying, you have hurt my feelings. What you might say instead is, I have allowed myself to feel you hurt my feelings.
Anything to do with this?
Pass it along. I may not have enough, so if I run out, just share. But this is what I'm going to be talking about next, the Ageist calling card. Yeah, I'm giving... Okay. You just made... This is another... See, this could be in the supermarket. You just made an ageist, ableist remark, or behaved in an ageist, ableist way. Sonny? Perhaps you didn't know it. Permit me to bring this to your attention. Such remarks or conduct demean individual targets. They have a political impact, like that of racism and sexism. They marginalize, silence, and deform an entire class of people, older people, and the differently abled. Ageism and ableism degrade our social world. They will bring you yourself a more bitter old age. That's what that gentleman said, right? All he has to do is wait, he'll get old. It will happen to him. But we don't want that world. We don't want a world in which every child of ours grows up into an ageist world. We want to change that. Thank you for reading this. Okay, now what do I do with this card? Aside from handing it out at lectures. I give it to faculty members. I talk at conferences and I give it to faculty members. And they show it to their students. Not all of them, but some of them decide that that's what they're going to do with it. And when they show it to their students, it's not so the student will give it away. It's so the student will notice. Right? And one professor had a Facebook page that they could all go to, and they could type in what they had observed. Sorry. Maybe it won't happen again. And they could type in what they observed, and then other people could comment on it. And thus, it was a teaching tool more than anything else. It wasn't necessarily the sort of thing you'd give out in the supermarket. Not very many people would want to give it out, I think. But it is a consciousness-raising tool, and we need to raise ageism consciousness. And that's one of the things that my book intends to help you do. In other words, particularly, I have to say this, I mean, you're probably more aware of it than your children and your grandchildren. They're the ones who need to have their ageism consciousness raised. So don't just give it back to me because you think you won't use it. I'm going to leave them here. Give it to your child, your adult child, or a grandchild, and just say, I'm not giving it to you because you've offended me. I'm giving it to you as a consciousness-raising exercise. And I'm about at the end. At the beginning, I read to you that every major movement, like the Revolution and the women's movement of 1848, had a declaration of grievances. And every movement has to show that it can summarize all the grievances and present them to the world as serious enough to warrant every single person's attention. No matter what their age, no matter what their gender, no matter what their race. And when I started writing the book, it was the book, the first page of the book is sort of a call for there to be such a declaration of grievances. Well, the book took me a long time to write, and by the time I had finished it, I had written a declaration of grievances. And it's short, it's only 2 pages long, it's the very end of the book, and this is the preamble. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of humankind to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which we currently occupy, the one to which the laws of equality and diversity entitle us, a decent respect to the opinions of humankind requires that we should declare the causes that impel us to cast off our patient subjugation. Our portion consists of older human beings, and they refers to agents of all ages who, knowingly or not, injure us or benefit from our subjugation. So that is really, well, that's the end of my talk. End ageism any way you can.
Thank you.